A millionaire took a homeless woman to his ex-fiancée's wedding, and what she did shocked everyone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The limousine engine purred softly outside a glittering hotel in downtown Chicago. Inside, Alexander Cole sat alone in the back seat, his broad shoulders tense under a perfectly tailored black suit. The crisp white envelope on his lap trembled slightly in his hand. It was the wedding invitation, an invitation to watch the woman he had once loved and almost married pledge her vows to another man. He had not planned to attend. He had sworn he would never give her that satisfaction. But pride is a cruel master, and Alexander was not a man who surrendered easily. If he showed up alone, he knew the whispers would spread like wildfire. The jilted millionaire, they would call him. The man not good enough to keep her. The very thought ignited a slow burn in his chest. "Sir," his driver asked carefully from the front seat, "shall we proceed?" Alexander's jaw tightened. He slipped the invitation back into his jacket pocket, then said coldly, "No, not yet." His eyes darted toward the crowded street outside the tinted glass window. He did not need just a date. He needed a spectacle. A woman so unexpected that it would leave every guest, and most importantly, his ex-fiancée, speechless. And then he saw her. A young woman stood at the corner near the subway entrance. Her hair was tangled, her coat threadbare, and she clutched a torn duffel bag to her chest as if it were the only thing she owned. She looked invisible to the bustling crowd, yet something about the quiet defiance in her stance made Alexander pause. Her eyes, though tired and rimmed with shadows, held a spark that refused to die. "Stop the car," Alexander commanded. The limousine glided to the curb. He stepped out, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. The woman flinched as his shadow fell across her, tightening her grip on the bag. "Do not be afraid," he said smoothly, his voice a mixture of authority and intrigue. "I have a proposal for you." She frowned, suspicion flashing in her gaze. "Look, if you are going to toss a few dollars my way, keep them. I am not begging tonight." Alexander's lips curved in a faint, humorless smile. "I am not offering charity. I am offering an opportunity. You are coming with me to a wedding." "Oh." Her mouth parted slightly in disbelief, then twisted into a bitter laugh. "A wedding? In this coat? With these shoes? You must be out of your mind." "Perhaps," Alexander admitted, "but I can promise you this by the end of the evening. You will not be invisible anymore." Silence stretched between them. The roar of passing traffic and the chatter of pedestrians faded, as though the city itself waited for her answer. Her eyes searched his, testing for mockery, for cruelty, for any sign that this was some elaborate joke, but all she found was cold determination. Against her better judgment, her curiosity stirred. "Fine," she whispered, almost to herself. "I will play along, just for one night." Alexander extended his hand. She hesitated, then slowly placed her rough palm in his. His grip was firm, commanding, yet strangely reassuring. The driver rushed to open the rear door. As she slid into the limousine, the plush leather seats and faint scent of cologne surrounded her, making her feel like she had crossed into another world. For the first time in years, someone had looked at her and seen more than a shadow on the street. She did not yet know his name. She did not yet know why he had chosen her. But as the car pulled away, her reflection in the dark window showed a woman on the brink of something extraordinary, something dangerous. And Alexander Cole knew exactly what he was doing. Tonight, at the wedding of his ex-fiancée, he would rewrite the story. And this homeless stranger would be his partner in the most audacious performance of his life. The limousine glided through the night streets, the city lights streaking across the windows like falling stars. Inside, silence stretched between Alexander Cole and the woman who had just stepped out of the shadows of the subway entrance. She sat stiffly on the leather seat, clutching her worn duffel bag to her chest, her wary eyes darting between the polished mahogany paneling and the man beside her. He studied her with calculated precision, noting the frayed edges of her coat, the calluses on her hands, the stubborn tilt of her chin. She was not like the women who usually circled his world. She was raw, unpolished, and utterly unconcerned with the masks of society. And perhaps that was exactly why he had chosen her. "Tell me your name," Alexander said finally, his voice low but commanding. Her lips pressed into a thin line before she answered. "Elena." "Elena," he repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of it. "Here is what you need to understand. Tonight, you will walk into a ballroom filled with the wealthiest, most ruthless people in Chicago. Every eye will be on us, every whisper will measure my worth. And you, Elena, will stand by my side as if you have always belonged there." Her brows furrowed. "You want me to pretend to be your lover?" "More than that," Alexander replied. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a diamond ring, gleaming under the car's dim lights. "You will be my fiancée, just for tonight." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "This is insane." "Insane," Alexander agreed, his eyes locked on hers. "But effective. You will not be there as a pitiful stranger. You will be there as the woman who replaced her, the woman she could never be." Elena looked down at her rough hands, then at the sparkling ring. For a moment, the absurdity of it all almost made her laugh. But behind his arrogance, she sensed something deeper, an old wound, still raw and bleeding. Perhaps that was why he needed her. "And what do I get out of this?" she asked cautiously. Alexander leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You will get what you said you wanted, to be seen, to no longer be invisible. For one night, you will step into a world where everyone will know your name. And when it is over, you will walk away with enough money to change your life forever." Elena swallowed hard. Her mind raced. It was dangerous, reckless. But the thought of vanishing again into the cold streets, unseen and unheard, made her chest tighten. Maybe, just for one night, she could borrow someone else's light. Slowly, she extended her hand. Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if fate itself had been waiting for this moment. The car turned onto a quieter street, stopping in front of a boutique. The driver hurried out to open the door. Alexander gestured for her to follow. Inside the boutique, rows of evening gowns shimmered under soft golden lights. Elena froze, overwhelmed by the elegance surrounding her. For a woman who had been surviving on street corners, this was another universe. "Choose one," Alexander instructed. Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "I cannot afford to breathe in this place, let alone touch the fabric." "You are not paying," he replied. "I am." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Why are you doing this? Really?" Alexander's gaze softened for just a fraction of a second before the steel returned. "Because appearances are power, and tonight I refuse to look powerless." A seamstress appeared, taking Elena's measurements. She protested, but Alexander silenced her with a glance. Within minutes, a gown was draped across her frame, deep blue satin, simple yet commanding, hugging her form in a way that made her reflection unrecognizable. She stared at the mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back. Gone was the invisible shadow at the subway entrance. Standing there was someone fierce, elegant, and untouchable. Alexander stepped closer, his reflection beside hers. "Perfect," he murmured. "Now you look the part." Elena's pulse quickened. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that she was stepping into dangerous territory. But another voice, louder, bolder, urged her forward. For one night, she would no longer be invisible. And as the limousine pulled back into the glowing streets, heading toward the grand ballroom where his ex-fiancée's wedding awaited, both Alexander and Elena knew there was no turning back. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, each crystal catching the light and scattering it across marble floors polished to a mirror's shine. Guests in tuxedos and gowns moved like waves of silk and shadow, laughter mingling with the clink of champagne glasses. At the top of the grand staircase, the bride and groom stood like royalty, receiving their guests with smiles that barely concealed their arrogance. Into this world of excess and judgment walked Alexander Cole, tall and composed, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. At his side was Elena, transformed beyond recognition in the deep blue satin gown. The diamond ring on her finger gleamed beneath the lights, and her chin lifted with a quiet defiance that none of the guests expected. A hush fell over the crowd as whispers rippled like fire through dry grass. "Is that his new fiancée?" She came out of nowhere. She does not belong here." The ex-fiancée, Clarissa, spotted them from across the room. Her smile froze, then sharpened into something cruel. She excused herself from the groom's side and swept toward them, her jeweled heels clicking against the floor with measured precision. "Well, well," Clarissa drawled, her voice dripping with mockery. "Alexander Cole, I must admit, I did not expect you to actually show your face here tonight." Alexander's smile was thin, unreadable. "Did you think I would hide?" Clarissa's eyes flicked to Elena, raking her up and down. "And who is this? Your latest project?" Elena felt the sting of those words like a slap, but before she could respond, Alexander placed a steady hand on her back. "Allow me to introduce her properly," he said, his voice smooth but carrying enough weight to silence the surrounding whispers. "This is Elena, my fiancée." Gasps echoed. Clarissa's painted lips curled into disbelief. "Your fiancé? You cannot be serious." Elena inhaled slowly, summoning courage she did not know she possessed. Meeting Clarissa's sharp gaze, she replied with quiet strength, "He is serious, and so am I." Clarissa laughed, sharp and brittle, drawing more eyes toward the confrontation. "Tell me, Elena, do you even know what it means to stand beside a man like Alexander? This world is not for people like you." The venom in her tone was unmistakable. The guests leaned closer, waiting for Elena to falter, to crumble under the weight of humiliation. But Elena did not. She straightened her shoulders and answered clearly, each word cutting through the air. "This world you speak of is built on masks and money. But love and loyalty are not bought. They are proven. And perhaps that is something you never understood." The room fell silent. Even the music from the string quartet seemed to dim. For the first time that evening, Alexander allowed himself a flicker of surprise. He had expected Elena to remain quiet, to endure the whispers. But here she was, standing taller than anyone in the room, holding her ground against the woman who had once broken him. Clarissa's smile faltered, then hardened into fury. "You are nothing. A nobody playing dress-up. Do you think one night in satin makes you belong?" Elena held her gaze, unflinching. "I do not need your approval to exist, and I do not need your permission to stand beside him." Gasps rippled again. Several guests exchanged looks, some impressed, others scandalized. But one thing was certain, no one in the ballroom would forget this moment. Clarissa, stung by the quiet dignity in Elena's voice, reached for a glass of champagne from a passing tray. With deliberate malice, she tilted it forward, letting the golden liquid spill down the front of Elena's gown. A collective gasp erupted. Elena froze, the cold seeping into the fabric. Before she could react, Alexander stepped forward, his voice cutting like steel. "Enough." His eyes burned with anger as he glared at Clarissa. "Do not mistake cruelty for victory. All you have shown tonight is your own pettiness." He removed his pocket square and gently dabbed the champagne from Elena's dress, his movements tender despite the storm in his eyes. The gesture sent another shockwave through the crowd. Elena, her heart pounding, placed her hand over his, steadying it. She turned to Clarissa, her voice calm but laced with fire. "You may have money. You may have a grand ballroom and every jewel on your neck, but none of it hides the emptiness in your heart." Clarissa's face flushed crimson. For once, she had no retort. The music swelled again, filling the silence that followed. Guests turned away, murmuring, the tide of opinion shifting. And in that moment, as Alexander guided Elena toward the dance floor, it was clear. The charade had become something more. For the first time in years, Alexander did not feel like the man who had been left behind. He felt like a man who had already won. The ballroom slowly returned to motion, though the echoes of the confrontation lingered in every whisper. Alexander guided Elena to the center of the floor, his hands steady on her back. The orchestra struck a new chord, and couples drifted to the dance floor. But all eyes remained fixed on them. "Do you know how to waltz?" Alexander asked quietly, his lips near her ear. Elena's cheeks flushed. "Not exactly." "Then follow my lead." He drew her close, his hand firm yet protective at her waist. At first her steps faltered, unsteady under the pressure of so many watching eyes. But Alexander's movements were sure. Guiding her with patience she did not expect from a man so hardened. Gradually, her body found the rhythm, her breath syncing with the music. Around them, whispers turned to murmurs of admiration. Even those who had scoffed moments earlier could not deny the strange harmony between them. As they moved, Elena risked a glance upward. For the first time, she saw something new in Alexander's face, softness breaking through the layers of control. He was no longer the man coldly plotting revenge against his ex-fiancée. He was simply a man, holding a woman who had stepped into his life like a storm he never saw coming. When the song ended, applause rippled through the crowd. Alexander bowed slightly, keeping Elena's hand in his. Then, without a word, he led her out of the ballroom, away from the suffocating stairs. They stepped onto the balcony, the night air cool against their heated skin. The city stretched out below, a sea of lights shimmering against the darkness. Elena exhaled, finally free from the weight of judgment. "You did well," Alexander said softly, breaking the silence. "I did not do it for you," she replied, her voice steady but gentle. "I did it because no one deserves to be humiliated like that. Not you, not me." He studied her profile, the way her hair caught the glow of the city lights. "You surprised me, Elena?" Most people would have crumbled under Clarissa's words. You did not. Elena's lips curved into a faint smile. "I have been through worse than insults. When you have slept under bridges, when you have fought to keep warm in the middle of January nights, words lose their power." Something inside Alexander shifted. He had lived his life surrounded by wealth and walls, yet here was a woman who had nothing but carried herself with more dignity than anyone in that glittering ballroom. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet ring box once more. "This ring was supposed to be part of an act," he admitted. "But tonight, it feels different." Elena's eyes widened slightly. "Alexander, do not confuse gratitude with something else. You hired me to play a role, and I agreed. That is all." "Is it?" he asked, his voice low, searching. For a moment the night held them in its breath. Elena turned away, gripping the balcony rail. "Do not make me believe this is real when it is not. I cannot afford to lose myself in a fantasy." Alexander stepped closer, his presence warm and steady. "And yet, here we are. A fantasy that feels more honest than the life I had before." Her heart pounded. She wanted to deny it, to push back the pull between them. But when his hand brushed against hers, she did not move away. A sudden burst of laughter from inside the ballroom broke the moment. They both turned, reminded of the audience still waiting beyond those glass doors. Alexander's jaw tightened. "Come. They will expect us to return." Elena nodded, masking the storm inside her chest. As they re-entered the ballroom, Clarissa's sharp eyes followed them. Her expression twisted with envy. She had hoped to break Elena, but instead the woman had emerged stronger, standing at Alexander's side with a quiet grace that unsettled everyone. The evening wore on, but beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. The contract that had begun as a shield of appearances was slowly turning into something neither of them could deny. When the final toast was raised and the last notes of music faded, Alexander led Elena out once more, his hand still clasped around hers. For the crowd, it was still a performance. For them, it was becoming dangerously real. The night had ended, but the story was only beginning. When the limousine door closed behind them, silence filled the cabin. Elena stared out the window at the glowing skyline, her reflection wavering in the glass. Alexander sat beside her, his expression unreadable, one hand resting loosely on his knee, the other still holding the velvet ring box, as if it had grown heavier with meaning. Neither spoke until the car stopped in front of Alexander's penthouse tower. The building rose like a monument of glass and steel against the midnight sky. Elena's throat tightened. She had never stepped into a place like this. "Come," Alexander said simply, offering his hand. Reluctantly, she took it. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble and gold accents. The elevator whisked them upward, silent and swift, until the doors opened into a vast living space overlooking the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the room, revealing Chicago glittering below like a field of stars. Elena set her duffel bag down gently, suddenly aware of how out of place it looked among the sleek furniture and modern art. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady her breath. "You can stay here tonight," Alexander said. "It is safer than sending you back out there." Her eyes flicked to him sharply. "Do not pretend this is kindness. You need me for your performance. That is all." He did not deny it. "Perhaps. But do you truly want to go back to the streets after tonight?" The question struck deeper than she wanted to admit. She turned away, staring at the glittering city lights. "I do not owe you my life, Alexander." "No," he said softly, almost to himself. "But you might change mine." His words unsettled her. She busied herself with removing the borrowed gown, carefully hanging it on a chair. She changed into simple clothes from her duffel bag, the contrast stark against the luxury surrounding her. When she emerged, Alexander was standing near the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes betraying the weight he carried. "Why her?" Elena asked suddenly. "Why did your ex-fiancée leave you?" He hesitated, then answered with bitterness, edged in pain. "Because I was not powerful enough. Because another man could offer her more. Status, connections, prestige. She traded love for leverage. That is the world we live in." Elena's chest tightened. She recognized the wound in his words, the same wound she carried from a life that had taken everything from her. "You think this act will heal you?" she asked quietly. "Dragging me into her wedding, pretending you have already moved on? Revenge is a fire, Alexander. It burns you as much as it burns them." He turned sharply, eyes flashing. "And what would you know of my world? You who have slept on sidewalks and begged for scraps?" The words cut, sharper than he intended. Regret flickered across his face, but it was too late. Elena's spine stiffened. "You are right," she said, her voice trembling with restrained fury. "I do not know your world, but I know pain. I know what it feels like to lose everything and still wake up the next day. Maybe that is something you have forgotten." She grabbed her duffel bag, heading toward the door. "Elena, do not," she snapped, tears threatening her eyes. "Do not make me believe I am more than a contract when all I am to you is a weapon against your past." The elevator doors closed behind her, leaving Alexander standing alone in the vast emptiness of his penthouse. The city lights suddenly colder. The next morning, headlines exploded across the news. A blurry photograph captured at the wedding showed Elena at Alexander's side, her diamond ring glinting under the chandeliers. The story spread like wildfire. Alexander Cole's mystery fiancée. Paparazzi swarmed the streets. Commentators speculated about her background. Who was she? Where had she come from? The scrutiny was relentless. And then, one photograph surfaced that shattered everything. A grainy image of Elena, sleeping on a park bench beneath a thin blanket, circulated online with cruel captions. The truth was out. The world now knew that Alexander's dazzling fiancée had once been homeless. Clarissa seized the moment, granting interviews with a smile sharp as a blade. "It is tragic, really," she said to the cameras. "Alexander has fallen so low that he parades a vagrant as his future wife. I almost pity him." The words spread like poison. Investors whispered. Allies questioned his judgment. Alexander's empire trembled under the weight of humiliation. And Elena, watching it all unfold on a flickering television in a cheap motel where she had taken refuge, felt her chest tighten until she could barely breathe. For the first time since their paths had crossed, she realized the cost of stepping into his world. And for Alexander, the contract that had begun as a shield had now become a blade, cutting into everything he thought he controlled. The scandal spread faster than either of them could control. Morning news anchors dissected every blurry photograph, every cruel headline. Comment sections filled with ridicule. Some mocked Alexander for choosing a woman beneath his station. Others attacked Elena, branding her a fraud who had clawed her way into high society by deception. In the penthouse, Alexander stood before the window, staring out at the city that suddenly felt hostile. His phone buzzed with calls from business partners, board members, and advisors. Each voice carried the same demand: distance yourself from her, protect your reputation, save your empire. But Alexander remained silent, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a response. Meanwhile, Elena sat in a dim motel room, the curtains drawn tightly shut. The television on the nightstand continued to replay the images of her in rags on a park bench, paired cruelly beside her picture in the satin gown. The contrast was brutal, designed to shame her. She switched the television off, her chest heavy. She had known this was coming. From the moment she stepped into his world, she had known the truth would surface. But knowing did not make the sting any less sharp. A knock sounded at her door. Her heart leapt with fear, thinking it might be reporters. But when she opened it, Alexander stood there. Exhaustion etched across his face. "You should not be here," she whispered urgently. "They are watching you." "I do not care," he said firmly, stepping inside. Elena turned away, hugging her arms around herself. "You should listen to them. Walk away from me before this ruins you." His jaw tightened. "Do you think I care about their whispers? Do you think their approval matters more than the truth?" Her eyes filled with tears. "The truth is that I do not belong in your world. Look at what has happened already. They are tearing you apart because of me." "Oh." Alexander moved closer, his voice dropping. "They are tearing me apart because I dared to choose differently. Because I refused to play by their rules. That is not your fault, Elena. It is mine." She shook her head, the weight of shame pressing down. "You needed me for a role, and I agreed. But this was never supposed to be real. We were not supposed to feel anything." His hand reached for hers, warm and steady. "And yet we do." The air between them trembled with the unspoken. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if she might give in, as if they could stand together against the storm. But then her resolve hardened. "No, Alexander," she whispered, pulling her hand away. "You deserve someone who will not drag you down, someone who will not make you fight every battle just to stand beside her." His eyes burned with frustration. "Do not decide for me." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I already have." She picked up her duffel bag, pushing past him toward the door. He followed, his voice rough. "Elena, if you walk away now, you will prove them right. You will prove that they won. Do not let them take this from us." She paused at the threshold, her back to him. "It is not about them. It is about me. I cannot carry this weight. I cannot be the reason your world collapses." And with that, she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. Alexander stood in the empty motel room, the echo of her absence louder than any insult the world could throw. Days turned into nights. The news cycle continued its assault. Investors pulled back, deals crumbled. His empire trembled, and though he fought fiercely, the damage was undeniable. Elena drifted through the city, avoiding cameras and reporters, surviving on what little she had left. Each headline cut deeper, each cruel word reminding her that she had become a weapon used against the man who had tried to give her more. But despite the pain, she could not forget the look in his eyes on that balcony, the sincerity in his voice when he said she had changed him. And deep inside, beneath the fear and the shame, a spark remained fragile but unyielding. She did not yet know that the storm was far from over, because soon, Alexander would be forced to make a choice that would either destroy him completely or prove to the world that love was stronger than power. The storm reached its peak when Alexander Cole walked into the shareholders' meeting that would decide the fate of his empire. The room buzzed with tension, filled with powerful men and women who had once applauded his every move but now eyed him with suspicion. At the head of the table sat Clarissa's new husband, a rival businessman whose smile carried triumph. "Cole," one board member said sharply, "your personal scandal has shaken investor confidence. Unless you issue a statement severing ties with that woman, we will have no choice but to remove you." Alexander's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady. "You mean sever ties with Elena? Let me tell you what she is not. She is not the shame you are trying to paint her as. She is not the weakness you whisper about in your circles. She is stronger than any of you, because she has lived through what none of you could survive." Gasps rippled around the room. His defiance sent murmurs surging through the crowd, but the rival only smirked. "Noble words, Alexander, but the truth is already out there. The world has seen her for what she island." Alexander stood taller, his voice rising. "No, the world has seen her through your lies. Tonight, they will see her through mine." That evening, he called a press conference. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions, their voices clashing in a storm of noise. Alexander stepped to the podium, the lights hot against his face. "You all know me as Alexander Cole, the businessman," he began. "But tonight, you will know me as Alexander Cole, the man who refuses to hide behind money and masks. You want the truth about Elena? Here at Island." He spoke of finding her that night by the subway entrance, of seeing not weakness but courage in her eyes. He spoke of dignity, of resilience, of the quiet strength that had humbled him. She may have slept on park benches, but she has more integrity than those who sit on thrones built from betrayal. And if you think I will abandon her to save myself, then you have never understood me at all. I will stand with her, even if it costs me everything. The crowd erupted, flashes blinding as reporters shouted louder. But in the back of the room, a single figure trembled Elena, watching from the shadows. She had not planned to come. She had told herself it was over. Yet his words pierced every wall she had built. Her heart raced as she realized the truth. He was not fighting for appearances anymore. He was fighting for her. And for the first time, Elena understood that she could not keep running. She stepped forward, pushing through the crowd, the cameras swinging toward her like floodlights. Gasps filled the air as she emerged beside him, her head held high despite the storm. "Everything he said is true," she declared, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "I was homeless. I was invisible. But he saw me, and he gave me the courage to see myself again." The press conference erupted into chaos. Yet in that moment, standing side by side under the glare of the world, Alexander and Elena knew the battle had shifted. This was no longer about contracts or appearances. This was about truth. And the truth was undeniable. The press conference spiraled into a storm of flashes and voices. But Alexander and Elena stood shoulder to shoulder, their presence unshaken. The image of the powerful millionaire choosing to defend a homeless woman, not with silence but with open defiance, became the headline of the night. By morning, the world was divided. Some mocked them louder than ever, calling it a spectacle. But others, ordinary people who had tasted hardship, saw in Elena a reflection of their own struggles. Social media lit up with messages of support. "She is one of us." Finally, someone who speaks for the invisible. Clarissa, furious at the shift in narrative, launched her final strike. She and her husband filed a lawsuit accusing Alexander of fraud, claiming his relationship was a staged deception meant to manipulate investors. The case made headlines instantly, threatening to drag him and Elena into court. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom brimmed with reporters and spectators. Clarissa sat smugly at the plaintiff's table, her jewels glittering beneath the harsh lights, convinced she had orchestrated Alexander's downfall. Alexander, however, rose to speak with calm authority. "Yes, our relationship began as an arrangement. I will not deny that. But arrangements end. What remains is truth. And the truth is this: I love her. Not for what she has, but for who she island. And if loving her means losing every dollar, then let it be so." Gasps filled the room. Elena's throat tightened, tears blurring her vision. For so long, she had believed she was nothing more than a contract in his world. Now, hearing his voice tremble with conviction, she knew his words were real. Clarissa's attorney pressed for proof, but it was Elena who stood. Her voice, though quiet, carried across the courtroom. "I never asked him for money. I never sought his power. I wanted only to disappear again when it was over. But he would not let me vanish. He believed I deserved to be seen, and because of him, I do." The judge rapped the gavel for order, silencing the chaos. Though the legal fight would continue, in that moment the verdict of the crowd was clear. The whispers in the room had shifted. For the first time, it was Clarissa who looked small. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed as Alexander reached for Elena's hand. He did not hide it. He raised their joined hands high, declaring for the world to see, "This is the woman I choose. No contract, no performance, only truth." The roar of voices rose, but this time it was not mockery, it was applause. And in that thunder of approval, Elena realized that love had turned their staged illusion into something unbreakable. The battle was not over, but their hearts were no longer in hiding. Together, they had chosen truth, and truth had set them free. Weeks passed after the courthouse showdown, but the echo of that day lingered in every headline, every broadcast, every whispered conversation. What began as scandal had transformed into something larger, something unshakable. People no longer saw Elena as a fraud. They saw her as a survivor, a woman who had stood against humiliation and still held her head high. Inside Alexander's penthouse, the city stretched before them like a sea of light. Elena stood near the window, her hand brushing against the glass, lost in thought. The old duffel bag that once carried her life sat quietly in the corner, untouched. She did not belong to the shadows anymore. Behind her, Alexander approached with a velvet box. She turned as he opened it, revealing the same ring that had begun their contract. Only now, it no longer symbolized a bargain. It carried something far greater. "Elena," he said softly, his voice steady but tender. "This ring was once part of a performance, but I cannot live another day pretending. I tore up the contract because I do not need an agreement to bind us. I need only the truth. And the truth is that I love you. Will you marry me, not as part of a deal, but as part of forever?" Tears welled in her eyes as she stared at him, her heart pounding. She remembered the first night she had stepped into his limousine, the way she had doubted every word, every glance. And now, standing here, she knew the man before her was no longer the cold millionaire chasing revenge. He was the man who had chosen her when the world demanded he let go. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Alexander. I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger once more, but this time it fit with a weight of permanence, not pretense. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if letting go would mean losing everything. Later that evening, Alexander surprised her with a gift. Draped across a chair was the gown she had worn on the night of the wedding confrontation, now carefully cleaned and restored. Beside it hung a new dress, white and radiant, shimmering in the soft light. "The first was borrowed," he said quietly. "But this one is yours, not for an act, not for a performance. For the day we begin our real life together." Elena touched the fabric with trembling hands, overwhelmed. The girl who had once been invisible on a street corner was now standing at the threshold of a new life, chosen not for wealth or status, but for the strength of her heart. And when Alexander kissed her, there was no audience, no cameras, no judgmental eyes. Only truth, only love, only the quiet promise of forever. The contract that had begun their story was gone. In its place stood a vow, unwritten, unbreakable, and undeniably real. And so, the millionaire and the woman who had once been homeless stepped forward together, not as an arrangement, not as a spectacle, but as partners in love. For the first time, they were free.